Someone asked me a question. How do you know when offenses begin to impact your marriage? And as I thought about it, I came up with 5 points I would want to share. I'm sure there are more. So if you're happy with to share any other point that comes to mind, please feel free to drop them in the comment section. And thank you for joining me on this one. My name is Chidi Akunna. If you're new to our channel, Foundation for Family Affairs, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell next to it so you know when we drop our content. Thank you. So, what are offenses though? It won't be right to talk about this question, to address this question, without knowing what offenses are. And the simple dictionary definition would be that it's annoyance or resentment, which comes about uh, because you perceive one to have insulted you or disregarded you. Simple. When you feel you've been insulted or disregarded. Now, looking at it in the context of marriage, how do you know when offenses begin to impact your marriage? It is inevitable that you would be with your spouse and not be offended at some point, But what matters is how you handle it. When I'm offended with my husband, how do I behave? How do I react? That's what determines the outcome at the end of the day. So, the first point I would want to put out here today is that when you start breaching agreements that you already had in place, you know that that offense, taking offense, is beginning to affect your marriage. What do I mean? If you, for instance, have ground rules, like we like to call them, certain ground rules, and you find yourself breaching them, ground rules like no name calling, no shouting. Okay, even if there's a disagreement that we're trying to sort out, you don't shout. Yeah, storming out in rage. When we have such ground rules, what that means is it has to they have to be respected. Okay, but when you find yourself flaunting them, when you think it's okay, I'm just going to, when you're having such conversations and your spouse is saying to you, okay, your tone, you need to take down your tone, and you're like, no, 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 I can't be bothered. Yeah. Or you find yourself, just storming out of the room in rage. At that point, the offense is beginning to impact your marriage. Yes, because ground rules are in place to help us, to check us, so things don't go overboard. But if we would have to flaunt them, then what's the point making them in the first place? So when you find yourself breaching such agreements, then of such offense, there are people who get offended, and because there's an agreement in place, like in our marriage, that there are certain expenses you would need to make, you would need to consult with the other. Okay, but because they're offended, I'd rather buy it than consult with him because I'm offended. We'll deal with the consequences later. But at that point, isn't that offense, taking that offense, already impacting your marriage? I think it is. Okay, so another point would be that when it starts to deplete the family purse, what do I mean? There are people who get offended. They make certain decisions that affects the marriage. As some of such decisions would be, you decide to maybe go off and sleep in a hotel because you're upset. Yes, I'd rather spend some nights in a hotel. Or there are people who even take it further and decide to rent themselves a place because they're upset. So if that offense lingers for 1 month, 2 months, because what you don't realize is because you stepped out, you're not addressing that issue. You're not coming together to resolve it. So it starts taking a life of its own. It becomes so big that you even forget what that issue is. What matters is that you're no longer living in the same house. So you find people who, yes, for 1 month, 2 months, they decide to rent a place and stay there. If we run a joint bus, or maybe not, if we run take this joint decisions, okay, we call it joint accounting, or some people call it joint decision making as regards to your finances. If that's the case, and you have agreed on something, probably you have a family project you're working towards for the year, and you've agreed on that and you go there to take some amounts because you need to pay for this new place you're staying, then the question would be, How is that not already affecting your marriage? I know there are different arrangements in place for different marriages, but this is just an example, okay, to let you know how it could affect your family first. Then another one would be that it could, when it begins to impact your mental and emotional well-being. Of course, it's beginning to affect your marriage. And what do I mean by that? Uh, you could probably, because you're affected by this, you're so offended, you're grossly offended with your spouse, you go to work and you can't focus because you have this thing in mind and it's eating you up. What you don't realize is it begins to affect your productivity. So your output is no longer as great as it used to be because you're not at your best. At that point, it could affect future promotion, it could affect future recommendations, depending on what you do. If it's a business, you know, and in the long run, affect your marriage. You see, and that's why we always push for the resolving issues on time as they come up. I was saying, speaking somewhere, and I said to them, when we resolve these issues, determine how fast or how well they are resolved. Because there are issues you need to resolve as soon as possible. Every issue should be resolved as soon as possible, right? But there are issues that when you leave them too long, it's really difficult to undo, right? So we should, as much as possible, try to resolve these issues. Then another point would be that it could affect the well-being of your children. It could affect the well-being of your children. And what do I mean? Sometimes when we allow, don't forget dictionary definition, resentment. And I think when we get to the point where we start resenting each other, we're taking it a bit, you're no longer hurt. It's like an accumulation of hurts, so it's piled up and become something. It's when we allow that start affecting us so much that they influence decisions that we make around our children. What do I mean? The atmosphere in the home becomes so toxic that your children start walking on eggshells. They don't want to be around. They come in and they can feel it, the emotions, and they just want to retreat. Some children who care would want to ask, Mom, are you okay? Dad, are you okay? That's not the kind of atmosphere you want to bring children up in. Another example would be as regards probably picking children up from school. When one person is so upset and it can't be bothered to contact the other if something is going on because you're not talking, I would rather not call him. So it's your turn, or it's you're responsible for picking the children up on a certain day. You decide, and probably something comes up at work, and you're unable to make it for that time. Rather than call your spouse, you decide you can't be bothered. So and this is why sometimes you find children who have been left behind at school or left behind too late. And I think it's really sad when it gets to that point that the children are impacted. Another one, which is a big one for me, really, is when people who used to look up to you are now the ones advising you because you have condescended so low. And what do I mean by that? Probably young people who you mentor, young people who you're trying to put in line for something, begin to see how you react to your spouse. They see you shout at him, they see you probably talk to him anyhow, and they're the ones now saying to you, "Oh, Auntie, please, you know, just because you've probably gone too far with it, you see, because when they start getting to that point, it means you're crossing a lot of lines and you're making the people around you uncomfortable. So when you get to that point where people really who are looking up to you are the ones now advising you and telling you, Auntie, you're going too far with this, please. I mean, I'm saying auntie because I'm a lady, so I'm an aunt to a lot of people. So when you get to that point, it's like, come on, are we not pushing this too far? So these are some points I thought I'll put out there. What other points come to mind? It will be nice to hear from you. And in the meantime, please feel free to go through our channel. We have a lot of resources we know would be of benefits to you. It's been nice doing this, and we look forward to having you join us again next time. Until then, I remain Chidi Akunna. Thank you for joining me. Have a